Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, Hyphens Classics. Today we're going to delve back into that Land Rover gearbox. I've got a few bits and pieces that we'll have a look at some point during this video, but for now, let's just jump back straight into some of these photos. So what we can see here, this is the main shaft. I did replace this bearing. I used my local garage, A&T Motors, big ups to helping me a lot with their press. So had that down, had the main bearing replaced. Then in the next image here, what we can see is, well, hopefully you can see it. On the right hand side of the shaft, you can just see there's the larger hole that holds the this part, you know, the bush in place. And somewhere on that shaft, there's also another smaller hole. So, you know, this is the offending piece, and we'll have a close up on that one in just a moment. But somewhere there is another pin, and this took me a while to find, as I may have mentioned before, I also got a little bit of help from a guy named Shabs from Synchro Gearboxes, who spoke to me. We spoke over IM, and he pointed out as to where this should be and helped me find it. In the next image now, you can see where I've managed to scratch away a little bit, and you can now see where that pin is. Now, being very, very careful, and this is quite a bit of a close-up, you can see the actual pin that I managed to drill out of here. So what we'll do, now that you've seen the images, what we're going to do is we're going to show you the actual parts, the pins, just show you how small these things are. Let's have a look at these parts. So this is what the new bush came in. So nice old classic genuine Rover parts. I like it. But obviously this is not the new part. This is what came out of the gearbox. So as you can see, I know I just had photos before, but now you can see the actual damage. So what happens is this starts to break free, and as you can see, that crack goes all the way around. Now this would normally be one piece. Now I'm not going to argue whether this would be reusable. I felt that it was far too gone to put back in the car. And I've been told by, I can't remember the person's name, so I apologise, but someone's commented the reason why this starts to fall apart is apparently the main shaft has quite a bit of flex in it. And obviously this is sitting quite solid on the main shaft. And when you've got your second and third gear sitting here, where it pushes backwards and forwards, there's, you know, that movement and the push of the gears is causing that to break. So as you can also see here, this is the top. So this is where the large pin would fit in, and you can see this one's had a bit of damage where the pin has either started to come out, or I don't know what the story is with it, but the pin has obviously come out and started to damage it. And if we have a quick look here, I'll pick it up. That's the remainder of the pin. Now, later on in the video, in this video, I will show you this part and the replacement, which is over twice the length of that. So you can see that was obviously not doing much inside the gearbox. And you know, I'd also hate to think what happened to the rest of that in the gearbox. So the other part we're going to pick up is a little bit smaller. Actually, I'll keep that one in my hand so you can see the difference. So the other pin that took a long time to find and drill out is there. So now you can see that's a tiny. So trying to find it was fun. I'll just turn it around and you can see where I actually managed to, hang on, see if you can see it, managed to start drilling it out. And I was quite fortunate, as you could see in the picture I showed you before, that the drill bit actually caught on that, and as I pulled the drill out slowly, that came with it. So there you go. Those are the small parts, and these are the problems that happen. Now, again, I'm not the mechanic. I know there are probably, I think it was I think he said now, again, my memory's failing me, I should have checked this before I did the film. In the Series 3, I think, is when the parts did become separated. One of the other things that was recommended to me was that you should use Loctite bearing holder when you put this on. Now, for me, that's not going to happen because I actually rebuilt this gearbox about 3 or 4 years ago. So I just put it back as it was. So, but there's a recommendation from someone who knows probably is a lot more about it than me. And those are the components. Right, let's get back to the rest of the gearbox. Now that we've had a good close-up of all those little bits and pieces, and you can appreciate how difficult this can be to put back together, let's go through the process of actually the rebuilding. So what we've got here, we've got the main shaft, images of the main shaft just sitting on the bench here, and you can see the two holes all cleaned up and ready to go. Little point to note, make sure when you're sticking this back together, don't stick both pins in straight away, because obviously you have to get that thrust washer in first before you stick the thicker, larger pin which holds the bush in place. So here we go. I've clamped this gently in the vise. Obviously make sure soft jaws or at least something wrapped around it so you're not, and not too tight so you don't damage the surface of the main shaft. Pushed in the little pin in this X image. You can just see that little pin showing out now. Obviously you remember from the very first shot how that was just completely gone. Obviously the thrust washer has been spinning around on that, not helping things at all. Thrust washer goes on, and then in this next image you can see also, again, you've seen what was left of the larger pin. In this image you can see I've got the old piece and the new pin. Quite a bit of difference. Right, we're putting in the large pin, and obviously you can now see in this image the thrust washer in place, the large pin in place, and the bush then goes on. I don't have all the images, but now we've got a final image here for this segment is the whole main shaft back together. Again, nice and shiny new, and hopefully all ready to go. I thought I'd just throw this image in here as well. Obviously this is not parts of the car, this is straight out of the parts book. So a number of you probably have the parts book, a number of people would have seen this before, but I thought I'd just put this in here just to help explain a little bit about the components inside the gearbox. So I've drawn a line through this because this has got the gearbox parts on the bottom half part of the picture, and on the top half it's got those are the transfer box components. So just quickly, we can see the main shaft on the top part there with the pinion shaft in the beginning. We've got the synchro mesh 4th and 3rd gear selector in the front there, and then coming down through you can see the bush that we've been talking about. You can see the thrust washer, the 2nd speed gear which sits on the front part of that bush, the 3rd speed sits on the other left hand side. You can see the 2 little pins located there, and I think when I was looking for parts for the gearbox, I noted the 2 pins, and you know, I ordered them before I even had the gearbox apart. So it was always, I think that was one of the things that I found quite amusing, is when I pulled this gearbox apart I had 2 pins and I couldn't find out where the 2nd pin went. Anyway, you know the story of that now. Also underneath we have the Layshaft. So I've drawn a line, as you can see. So when the car's in neutral effectively, the pinion shaft will be driving if you've got obviously the clutches in, and it drives down through into the Layshaft. And obviously then, based on your selection, you've either going to have your 1st speed, which is right down the back of the shaft, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute, and the issues I had with that. So you've got your 1st speed up on the main shaft, reverse gear, which just comes in the middle when you want to go in reverse. So again, I just thought this would be helpful just to have a look at that. Okay, the Layshaft. So I've got some images here of the 1st gear on the Layshaft, or 1st speed as they called it in the parts manual. And so this obviously all came apart. Wanted to make sure that all of the part components of the shaft and the gears were in top notch or in good enough condition to go back. So we had that off, and when I was putting it back on, I did have a new bearing. I did get a new bearing, purely I just did. There was nothing wrong with this one in the end, and to be honest, I actually ended up using this bearing because the new one didn't quite fit. So in this images here, I think a few people who've probably taken gearboxes apart can notice that there's something wrong. But when I first put it together, it seemed snug. It wasn't looking like it was going to be going on any further than it did. But when I came to put the gearbox together, I definitely had some issues. And we'll show some images of that a little bit later on. The nice job. Now, lucky for you, I didn't capture all of the images of cleaning up the casing, but this took a while. Lots of cleaner, lots of scraping with different tools to make sure I could get stuff off without damaging the aluminium, and then finally a really good rub down with steel wool. I had a few jokes from a few online friends saying, "That's a little bit too clean to go back in the car, Michael," but I figured it was out, it was apart, I may as well do it. And also it saves me from putting more crap back into it when I was putting it back together. Looking at the image now, we've got the main shaft in the housing, and there's a few different images here where I put the synchro gear in, then I've taken it out for different reasons, just trying to make sure the fit is right. Got the Layshaft in, sitting in there, and in this image, easier to see that the Layshaft is sitting just a little bit proud of the pinion gear, and this is where my problems came. I tried to fit the bell housing on, and while you could tighten it down fairly well, there was always like about a mil or so gap, and when you did start to tighten it down a little bit, trying to turn the gears, the shafts, they were just locked solid tight. So I knew I definitely had a problem here. So looking at this image, I just had the Layshaft back out. I was making sure there was nothing wrong down inside the casing, that I hadn't knocked out of place, or maybe there was something not quite right. But going back to this image of the Layshaft in the first speed gear and the bearing, you can, looking at it again, you can see this gap between the bearing and the first gear, and there's also a gap on the shaft to the first gear, and this shouldn't have been there. So with a little bit more persuasion, you can see in this next image how it's now all flush. Putting it back in, we can see now that the gears are meshed perfectly. User error, first time taking apart a gearbox, and hey, lesson learned, but that took a while. That was always a fun and a frustrating piece of putting this thing together. Now we've got the bell housing on, sitting perfectly, we start putting the selector gears back in. So going for the middle one, so that's, again, what's that one? That's first to second. Yes, it is. Just had to think about that one for a minute. Then going for the third and fourth, and then putting in reverse, and they're all in. We've got the gearbox together now. The gearbox, the bell housing is all in place. The selectors are in place. We've also managed to now put the top cap on top of the gearbox. The next thing to finish this off is the clutch housing. So, as you remember from earlier, I had a diesel one. Now, I did get hold of an 80-inch clutch housing as well, but it had some issues with it. Like I mentioned, I think there was a bench selector fork shaft, and so I ended up having to buy, I ended up with two or three in the end that I ended up with, and it was really just trying to get enough parts together to actually put a good one together. I managed to get a left-hand, I ended up buying a left-hand drive one as well, which was just interesting to see how that one went together. Still got a lot of the parts over, but ended up with all the bits I needed. I think I remember us also mentioning that on the selector shaft underneath the two forks, as I pulled it out, I hadn't realised, hadn't looked in the parts, hadn't noted that there was a big spring in there. And I remember when I took it apart, I pulled everything out, and the spring just took off across the workshop. So be careful, because that took me about half an hour to find, but I was quite happy to have found it. So looking through the bits, took it all apart, gave it a good clean, put in a nice new gasket there, as you can see in this image, and put that all back together. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I went through all of the studs that I had for this, and I think some of the studs that I had in one of the bell housings were bent, so went around, found all the good ones, and used those to make sure we were all good. And now having a quick look at the gear stick itself. So here we've taken it apart, taken all of the spring and all the clips that hold it into the aluminium housing. So I wanted to give it a good clean and make sure there wasn't too many major issues going on inside there, so that it wouldn't fall off in the hands when I started to use it. Painted up the holder for it, gave it a good clean. And one of the things in this image here, you can see this is the reverse gate. So this is basically to stop you from pushing over into reverse when you're driving down the road. Just obviously needs a bit of extra push. You can see here this has had a little bit of what should we call it, backyard engineering on it, but hey, it works. I did think about buying a new one, but I thought, no, this works. Why would I change it? It's part of the history of the Land Rover. I did certainly change the bolts though, because they'd gone, and I had to get those the nuts rethreaded, put some new springs on it to make sure that was nice and tight, but otherwise it was all good. Right, we're going to hop in the car now. We'll talk a little bit more about that, about the gear stick, and see some of the issues that you will find with it. Having a look at the gear stick, there's a couple of things that happen with these. One of the most common things is they snap off, which I can imagine as you're driving down the road, that would be a little bit of fun, wouldn't it? So as you can see, this one has at some point broken off, and as you can see, there's some good amount of weld there as someone's welded that back on. One of the other issues that can occur with these things, as you can see, there's a slight slot in the ball here, and there's a little grommet that goes in there. So either the grommet comes loose or it falls out altogether. But what can happen is with constant movement over the years, you can see this one has a little play backwards and forwards, which is too much. It shouldn't really be that sloppy. So that can be a number of things. Obviously, if the grommet's not in there properly, or if it's not got enough grease on it, over time this slot wears and it becomes curved, and so you get a lot more play in the gear stick. Those are the common things that we find with the gear stick. I hope you've enjoyed the video today, guys. We're going to wrap it up there. That's the gearbox all back together. Any questions on some of the issues I've had, any questions you've got about things that you might be facing, drop them in the comments below. Now, you may have noted a couple of things over my shoulder. Maybe a bit of a teaser as to what you might see in the future. But for now, we're going to wrap it all up. Thanks again for watching. Remember, like, subscribe and comment, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers for now.